Chapter 1. The Rise of the War Master. In an age when the stars themselves seemed to tremble with possibility, humanity stood on the precipice of greatness. This was the era of the Great Crusade, a time when the Emperor of mankind sought to unify a fractured galaxy and bring order to a universe ravaged by millennia of darkness and strife. The dream was as grand as it was audacious: to eliminate the superstitions and petty tyrannies that had enslaved humanity and replace them with enlightenment, reason, and unity under the imperial banner. At the heart of this dream stood the Emperor himself, a being of unparalleled power and vision. To his followers, he was a god in all but name, a golden figure who could see the threads of fate and bend reality to his will. Yet, for all his power, even the Emperor could not achieve his vision alone. The galaxy was vast beyond imagining, its stars numbering in the billions, each surrounded by countless worlds teeming with life and conflict. To conquer it, the Emperor needed generals, champions, and above all, leaders who could share his burden. Thus, the Primarchs were created, 20 beings of extraordinary strength, intellect, and charisma, each crafted from the Emperor's genetic essence. They were more than warriors. They were demigods, each designed to command one of the Emperor's mighty Space Marine legions. Together, they would be the architects of the Great Crusade, the instruments of humanity's ascension. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. Before the Primarchs could be fully grown, the forces of chaos, the malevolent entities of the warp, intervened. In a moment of cosmic sabotage, the infant Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy, their gestation pods hurled to distant, unknown worlds. The Emperor, though wounded by this loss, did not despair. Instead, he set out to find his lost sons, reuniting them one by one as the crusade unfolded. Among these 20 sons, one stood above all others: Horus Lupercal. Found on the brutal and lawless world of Chthoniya, Horus was the first of the Primarchs to be recovered. The bond he formed with the Emperor was immediate and profound. While the other Primarchs would come to know their father later, as a distant and almost mythic figure, Horus alone had the privilege of growing up at the Emperor's side. He fought alongside him in the earliest campaigns of the Great Crusade, learning not only the art of war, but the intricacies of leadership, diplomacy, and vision. Horus was not merely a warrior. He was a beacon of inspiration. Where other Primarchs commanded loyalty through fear, respect, or unyielding discipline, Horus won hearts with his charisma, warmth, and deep understanding of those who followed him. He could inspire a mortal soldier to stand against impossible odds and unite even his most fractious brothers. To the Emperor, Horus was more than a son. He was a confidant, a partner in the great dream of unity. Under Horus's command, the Luna Wolves, the 16th Legion, became one of the most formidable forces in the galaxy. They were not just soldiers, but conquerors, diplomats, and builders of empires. Every campaign led by Horus was a testament to his genius. He was a master of strategy, able to see not just the immediate battle, but the larger war. Planets fell before him. Entire star systems pledged allegiance to the Imperium. And with every victory, the dream of unity came closer to reality. But it was not just his skill in war that set Horus apart. It was his ability to unite. The Primarchs, though brothers by design, were not always harmonious. Each was a reflection of the Emperor's own multifaceted nature, and their differences often led to conflict. Where Rogel Dorn was rigid and unyielding, Fulgrim was flamboyant and perfectionist. Where Angron burned with rage, Guilliman sought calm order. Horus, however, had a gift for mediating these tensions. He could speak to each of his brothers in a way that made them feel understood, valued, and above all, respected. He was, in many ways, the glue that held the Primarchs together. And so, when the time came for the Emperor to step back from the Great Crusade to focus on a secret project on Terra, there was only one choice for who would lead in his stead. Horus Lupercal was named War Master, a title that elevated him above all other Primarchs. He was now the supreme commander of the Imperium's armies, the one who would oversee the final stages of the Crusade and bring the Emperor's vision to its ultimate fulfillment. The proclamation of Horus as War Master was met with celebration across the Imperium. For the mortal soldiers of the Imperial army and the citizens of the Imperium, it was a moment of hope. They had seen Horus's deeds, heard of his victories, and believed in his leadership. To the Primarchs, however, the news was more complicated. While some, like Sanguinius and Pharasmanus, celebrated their brother's elevation, others harbored resentment. To Lorgar, who had long worshipped the Emperor as a god, Horus's ascension was an affront. To Perturabo, it was a reminder of the recognition he felt he had been denied. Even Guilliman, ever pragmatic, wondered if the Emperor's choice was a mistake. Horus himself accepted the title with humility, yet deep down, doubts began to fester. The burden of leadership was immense, and the Emperor's decision to retreat to Terra raised troubling questions. Why had his father abandoned the Crusade? What was this secret project that demanded such isolation? Was it truly a sign of trust? Or was the Emperor distancing himself from the sons he had created? These doubts, though small at first, would grow over time, feeding into the events that were to come. For now, though, Horus threw himself into his role as War Master. He led the Crusade with the same brilliance and passion that had defined his earlier campaigns. New worlds were brought into compliance, Xenos empires were shattered, and the Imperium's banner spread further than ever before. To the galaxy, it seemed that the dream of unity was within reach. Yet, even in these days of triumph, unseen forces were at work. In the Immaterium, the realm of chaos, dark gods watched with interest. They saw in Horus a figure of immense potential, not just a warrior, but a soul that could be twisted, a leader whose fall could shatter the Imperium itself. For in their eyes, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. And so, even as Horus stood at the pinnacle of glory, the seeds of betrayal were already being sown. This, then, was the rise of the War Master, a tale of hope, ambition, and unity, but also one of jealousy, doubt, and unseen corruption. It was the beginning of a story that would end in fire, blood, and betrayal. A story that would forever change the fate of the galaxy. Chapter 2. The Seeds of Betrayal. For every dream of greatness, there lies a shadow of doubt. For every triumph, a seed of ruin. As Horus Lupercal rose to become War Master of the Imperium, a title bestowed with both glory and responsibility, so too began the slow and insidious descent that would forever change the course of human history. Horus was beloved, a figure whose name inspired loyalty and reverence from both his mortal followers and his brothers, the Primarchs. But the universe is rarely kind to those who shine the brightest. In the unseen depths of reality, forces ancient and malevolent had turned their gaze upon him. The ruinous powers of chaos, the dark gods of the warp, saw in Horus not just a warrior, but an opportunity. They knew the truth that no mortal dared to utter. Even the strongest of souls could be broken, and even the most loyal of sons could be turned. The seeds of betrayal were not planted in a single moment. They were cultivated over time, growing slowly in the cracks of Horus's mind and heart. The first crack appeared not on the battlefield, but within the soul. As War Master, Horus had been entrusted with the weight of the Emperor's dream, yet the burden was immense. The Emperor had withdrawn to Terra, secluding himself in his secret project, leaving Horus to lead the Great Crusade. To many, it was a sign of trust, but to Horus, it was a question unanswered. Why had his father stepped away? Why had he chosen to retreat at the very moment victory seemed within reach? The answers did not come. The Emperor, ever enigmatic, offered no explanations, and Horus was left with his doubts. Those doubts were not his alone. Among his brothers, there were whispers of discontent. Some, like Lorgar, chafed at the Emperor's strict rejection of faith and worship. Others, like Perturabo and Angron, felt overlooked and undervalued, their contributions ignored in favor of others. These fractures within the Brotherhood of the Primarchs were subtle at first, but undeniable. And where doubt festers, chaos finds its way. The pivotal moment came on the planet of Davin. Horus, ever the consummate general, had led a campaign to bring a recalcitrant world back into compliance. The war had been swift and decisive, but what awaited him on Davin would prove far more dangerous than any Xenos or rebel army. A strange and insidious influence hung over the planet, a taint that seemed to seep into the very air. It was here that Horus encountered Erebus, the first chaplain of the Word-Bearers Legion and a secret servant of chaos. Erebus had long since turned away from the Emperor's light, his faith in the ruinous powers hidden behind a mask of loyalty. He saw in Horus a figure of immense potential, a leader whose fall could bring about the destruction of the Imperium itself. On Davin, Erebus set his plan into motion. It began with a betrayal. Horus was lured into an ambush, gravely wounded by a weapon tainted with the essence of chaos. The War Master was carried back to his fleet, his life hanging by a thread. And it was then that Erebus made his next move. In his wounded state, Horus was taken to the Serpent Lodge, a place of dark ritual and forbidden power. There, Erebus convinced Horus's closest advisors that the Lodge's sorcery could save his life. Desperate and afraid, they agreed. What followed was not healing but corruption. As Horus lay unconscious, his spirit was drawn into the immaterium, the realm of chaos. There, he was confronted by visions that would forever change him. The chaos gods did not appear to Horus as monsters or demons. They came as voices of reason, as beings who claimed to offer the truth the Emperor had hidden. They showed him visions of a future where the Emperor ruled as a tyrant, casting aside his sons and enslaving humanity under the guise of unity. They whispered of betrayal, of how the Emperor had used the Primarchs as mere tools to achieve his own ambitions. And they offered Horus something the Emperor never had: power, freedom, and the chance to shape the galaxy as he saw fit. Horus was not easily swayed. He raged against the gods, accusing them of lies and manipulation. But the seeds had been planted. The doubts he had long buried were now laid bare, and the promises of chaos were alluring. They spoke to his pride, his ambition, and his desire to see the galaxy united not under the Emperor's rule, but his own. In the end, Horus made a choice that would echo across the stars for millennia. He accepted the power of chaos, not out of greed, but out of a belief that he was the savior humanity needed. In his mind, he was not betraying the Emperor. He was liberating humanity from his father's lies. When Horus awoke, he was changed. To his followers, he appeared the same, a charismatic leader, a brilliant tactician, but beneath the surface, he had become something far darker. The taint of chaos had taken root, and with it came a new resolve. Horus began to see his brothers not as allies, but as obstacles. He started to surround himself with those he could trust or control, while pushing away those who remained loyal to the Emperor. The first test of Horus's newfound allegiance came swiftly. On the planet of Istvan III, he orchestrated a purge of his own forces. Loyalist elements within the Luna Wolves and other legions were sent to the surface under the pretense of a final compliance action. Once they were deployed, Horus ordered an orbital bombardment, killing thousands of his own men in an act of cold calculation. It was a message, not just to the Emperor, but to the galaxy. Horus had chosen his path, and there would be no turning back. But the seeds of betrayal were not sown in isolation. Horus's fall was mirrored by that of several other Primarchs: Fulgrim, Magnus, Mortarion, and Angron. All of them were drawn into the web of chaos, each for their own reasons. Some were manipulated, others coerced, but all were bound by a shared hatred for the Emperor, and a belief that Horus offered a better future. Together, they formed the core of what would become the Traitor Legions, a force that would plunge the galaxy into the most devastating war it had ever seen. And so, the seeds of betrayal blossomed into a dark and terrible flower. What had begun as whispers and doubts had grown into a full-scale rebellion with Horus at its heart. He was no longer the war master of the Emperor. He was the chosen of chaos, the spearhead of their assault on the Imperium. Yet even as the galaxy began to burn, there were those who clung to hope. For though Horus had turned against his father, the dream of unity had not yet been extinguished. The loyalist Primarchs, the defenders of humanity, would rise to meet this new threat. But at what cost? This, then, was the beginning of the Horus Heresy, a tale of corruption and ambition, of brotherhood shattered and loyalty betrayed. The seeds had been sown, and now the galaxy would reap the whirlwind. Chapter 3. Brother against brother war had come to the Imperium, not a war of conquest or compliance, but a war of betrayal, a war between brothers. What began as whispers of doubt and the secret corruption of Horus Lupercal had now erupted into open rebellion, and the galaxy trembled beneath the weight of this civil strife. The Emperor's dream of unity was shattered, its fragments scattered across the stars. The betrayal at Istvan III was the first true blow. Horus, now fully enthralled to the dark gods of chaos, faced a dilemma. His legions Astartes, the mighty space marines he commanded, were not unified in their allegiance. Many of his warriors still held true to the Emperor, their loyalty unshaken despite their war master's fall. For his rebellion to succeed, Horus needed to purge his forces of those who would oppose him. The solution was as brutal as it was efficient. Under the guise of a compliance mission, Horus gathered the loyalist elements of his legion, as well as those from other legions who might stand against him, and deployed them to the surface of Istvan III. They were given orders to cleanse the planet of its resistance, an ostensibly routine campaign. But as the Loyalists began their assault, Horus revealed his true intentions. From orbit, he unleashed a devastating virus bombing, annihilating the planet's surface in a hellish conflagration. Billions of lives were extinguished in an instant, and the Loyalist space marines were caught in the firestorm. Yet not all perished. By some twist of fate, or perhaps the will of the Emperor, a portion of the Loyalists survived, taking shelter in the ruins of the planet. They regrouped and fought back with desperate determination, waging a guerrilla war against the traitorous forces. The battle for Istvan III became a bitter and personal conflict. Brother fighting brother amidst the ashes of betrayal. The Loyalists knew they were doomed, but they fought not for victory, but for honor, for the hope that their defiance would inspire others. The massacre at Istvan III was a turning point, but it was only the beginning. News of Horus's rebellion spread like wildfire, and with it came division. Across the galaxy, the Space Marine legions faced a choice: loyalty to the Emperor or allegiance to Horus. The lines were drawn, and the legions themselves were split. The Loyalist Primarchs, Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, Guilliman, and others, rallied their forces, preparing to defend the Imperium against the encroaching tide of chaos. Meanwhile, the traitorous Primarchs, corrupted by their own ambitions and grievances, pledged themselves to Horus's cause. But the most horrifying aspect of this war was not its scale or ferocity, it was its intimacy. The Primarchs were not mere generals, they were brothers, bound by blood and purpose. To see them turn on one another was to witness a tragedy of the highest order. The bonds forged during the Great Crusade were now shattered, replaced by hatred and mistrust. On the battlefield, warriors who had once stood shoulder to shoulder now met as enemies, their blades stained with the blood of those they had called comrades. The next blow came at Istvan V, in what would be remembered as the Drop Site Massacre. Horus, now fully revealed as the leader of the rebellion, had established a base of operations on the planet. The Loyalist forces, led by the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard legions, launched a massive assault to bring Horus to justice. They believed they were united, that their cause was just, and that victory was within their grasp. But Horus had anticipated their attack, and his treachery ran deep. Unknown to the Loyalists, several of the legions that had pledged to support them, the Alpha Legion, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, and Word-Bearers, had already turned to chaos. As the Loyalists landed on Istvan V, they found themselves surrounded. The traitor legions revealed their true colors, turning on their erstwhile allies in a slaughter that would echo across the ages. The Drop Site Massacre was a scene of unimaginable carnage. The skies burned as drop pods and warships collided in fiery explosions. Titans, towering war machines of immense power, dueled amidst the chaos, their weapons leveling mountains. On the ground, Space Marines fought with a ferocity born of desperation. The Loyalist forces were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, their lines collapsing under the weight of the traitor assault. Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, met his end on the battlefield, his life claimed by the blade of his brother Fulgrim, now fully corrupted by the decadence of chaos. Vulcan of the Salamanders and Korax of the Raven Guard barely escaped with their lives, their legions devastated. The Loyalists had hoped to strike a decisive blow against Horus, but instead, they had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Imperium's hope of a swift end to the rebellion was extinguished, and the galaxy descended further into chaos. As the Horus Heresy unfolded, the bonds of brotherhood continued to unravel. The Primarchs who had chosen Horus's side did so for a variety of reasons, each shaped by their own flaws and grievances. Fulgrim, once a paragon of perfection, had been seduced by the promises of excess and sensation offered by Slanesh, the chaos god of pleasure. Angron, the Red Angel, embraced the bloodlust of Khorne, the god of war and murder. Mortarion, the grim and stoic lord of the Death Guard, turned to Nurgle, the god of decay, in a desperate bid to save his legion from annihilation. And Lorgar, the once faithful son who had sought to worship the Emperor as a god, now served chaos with a fervor born of bitterness and betrayal. But not all of the traitors fell willingly. For some, like Magnus the Red of the Thousand Suns, the path to rebellion was one of tragic misunderstanding. Magnus, a master of sorcery, had sought to warn the emperor of Horus's corruption, using his psychic powers to breach the emperor's sanctum. But his actions, though well-intentioned, were seen as a grave betrayal. The emperor, enraged by Magnus's defiance, ordered the Space Wolves to destroy the Thousand Suns' homeworld of Prospero. The resulting conflict drove Magnus into the arms of chaos, his loyalty shattered by the very father he had sought to protect. The Loyalists, for their part, fought with unyielding resolve. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, fortified the imperial palace, preparing for the inevitable siege. Sanguinius, the angelic primarch of the Blood Angels, rallied his forces, his golden wings a symbol of hope amidst the darkness. Guilliman of the Ultramarines mobilized the largest legion in the Imperium, his strategic brilliance a bulwark against the tide of chaos. And Leman Russ of the Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioner, led countless campaigns to hunt down and destroy the traitor forces. Yet even among the Loyalists, there were divisions and doubts. The scale of the betrayal was unprecedented, and the toll it took on morale was immense. The Imperium, once a beacon of unity, was now a realm divided. The war consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but ashes and ruin in its wake. And always, at the heart of the conflict, was the tragic reality that this was not merely a war of conquest or survival. It was a war of brother against brother. As the Horus Heresy raged on, the galaxy itself seemed to weep. Worlds burned, legions were broken, and the dreams of unity and peace became little more than distant memories. The bonds that had once held the Primarchs together were now irreparably severed, replaced by hatred, mistrust, and the insidious influence of chaos. The tragedy of the heresy was not just in its destruction, but in the loss of what could have been: a galaxy united, an imperium unbroken. This then was the heart of the Horus Heresy, a war where brother fought brother, where loyalty was tested, and where the seeds of doubt and ambition had grown into a wildfire that consumed all in its path. The stage was now set for the final apocalyptic chapter of this tale, a confrontation that would determine the fate of humanity and leave scars upon the galaxy that would never heal. Chapter 4. The Siege of Terra. For 7 long years, the galaxy burned. The fires of rebellion, lit by the betrayal of Horus Lupercal, spread to every corner of the Imperium. Entire systems fell, their worlds turned into battlefields or consumed by chaos. The once glorious dream of humanity's unity under the Emperor's banner was now a distant memory, replaced by the harsh reality of civil war. But even as the Imperium faltered, the light of Terra, the throne world, the heart of the Emperor's vision, remained. And it was to Terra that the War Master's gaze now turned. The Siege of Terra, the final and most devastating act of the Horus Heresy, was not merely a battle. It was a clash of titanic wills, a confrontation between the 2 greatest figures in human history: the Emperor of mankind and his most beloved son, Horus. Around them swirled armies of unimaginable scale, their weapons capable of destroying planets, their warriors numbering in the millions. At stake was not just the fate of the Imperium, but the very soul of humanity. Horus's advance toward Terra was methodical and brutal. System by system, he dismantled the Loyalist resistance, his forces swelling with every victory. Traitor legions, chaos cultists, and renegade imperial forces rallied to his banner, their loyalty bought with promises of power, vengeance, or survival. The War Master's fleet was a juggernaut, its ships bristling with firepower, its soldiers hardened by years of war. The path to Terra was paved with blood, the screams of the fallen echoing in the void. For the Loyalists, every day was a desperate fight for survival. The Imperium was fractured, its forces scattered and outnumbered. Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, took command of Terra's defenses, transforming the Imperial Palace into a fortress of unparalleled strength. The palace, already a symbol of the Emperor's might, became a labyrinth of walls, gates, and defensive lines, each designed to withstand the full fury of Horus's assault. But even Dorn knew that Terra could not stand alone. Messages were sent across the warp, desperate pleas for aid to the Loyalist legions still scattered across the galaxy. Robut Guilliman and his Ultramarines were too far away, locked in their own battles against the traitors. Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels was similarly delayed, his fleet caught in the labyrinthine warp storms that Chaos had unleashed. Only Sanguinius and his Blood Angels were able to reach Terra in time, their arrival a beacon of hope amidst the gathering darkness. The siege of Terra began with the arrival of the War Master's fleet. It was a sight unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. An armada of warships, their hulls adorned with the blasphemous sigils of Chaos, descending upon the throne world in an apocalyptic storm. The traitor forces outnumbered the defenders by a staggering margin. Titans, the god machines of the Mechanicum, marched alongside demon engines and corrupted war constructs. The skies above Terra were filled with the roar of drop pods and landers, each carrying legions of traitor space marines and mortal soldiers bent on conquest. Horus's strategy was as ruthless as it was brilliant. He knew that a prolonged siege would favor the defenders, so he unleashed the full might of his forces in a series of relentless assaults. The first wave struck Terra's outer defenses, overwhelming orbital platforms and planetary fortifications in a tidal wave of destruction. Despite the defenders' valiant efforts, the sheer scale of the attack forced them to retreat to the inner lines, consolidating their strength around the Imperial Palace. The battle for the palace itself was a nightmare. The traitors assaulted its walls with unrelenting ferocity, their siege engines pounding the fortifications day and night. The skies above were a chaotic inferno, filled with the screeching of aircraft and the flash of energy weapons. Titans dueled amidst the ruins, their void shields crackling with power as they exchanged devastating blows. On the ground, Space Marines, Custodes, and mortal soldiers fought in the trenches and corridors, their lives spent to buy precious seconds. Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch of the Blood Angels, became a symbol of hope for the defenders. His golden wings and radiant presence inspired those around him, even in the darkest moments. Time and again, he led counterattacks against the traitors, his blade cutting down demon and traitor alike. Yet even Sanguinius could not be everywhere, and the toll of the siege weighed heavily on him and his warriors. The Blood Angels, though fierce, were but one legion, and the traitors seemed endless. Amidst the chaos, the traitor Primarchs led their legions with ruthless efficiency. Angron, the Red Angel, was a whirlwind of rage, his blood-soaked path carving through the defenders like a scythe. Mortarion, the Death Lord, unleashed the pestilence of Nurgle, turning entire sections of the battlefield into festering quagmires of disease and decay. Fulgrim, the Prince of Excess, reveled in the slaughter, his laughter echoing as he danced through the carnage. These were not merely enemies, they were nightmares given form, their presence a constant reminder of the price of Horus's betrayal. Yet for all his power and cunning, Horus knew that the siege could not drag on indefinitely. He had to break the defenders quickly, for every day that Terra stood was another day for loyalist reinforcements to arrive. To this end, he made a fateful decision. Lowering the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, he issued a challenge to the Emperor himself. It was a calculated risk, a gamble to lure the Emperor into a final confrontation. The Emperor, despite his immense power, had remained within the imperial palace, directing the defense through his psychic might. But with the fate of humanity hanging by a thread, he could no longer remain a passive observer. Gathering his most trusted warriors, including Sanguinius and Rogel Dorn, the Emperor teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit to confront Horus directly. The final battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit was the stuff of legend. Sanguinius, ever the noble warrior, confronted Horus first. Though weakened from the siege, the angelic Primarch faced his corrupted brother with unwavering resolve. Their duel was fierce, a clash of ideals as much as strength. Sanguinius fought valiantly, but Horus, empowered by the Chaos Gods, was unstoppable. In a moment of tragic inevitability, the War Master struck down his brother, the golden light of Sanguinius dimming forever. The Emperor's confrontation with Horus was the climax of the Heresy. Father and son, creator and creation, met in a battle that transcended mere physicality. Horus, now the embodiment of chaos, unleashed his full might, his power a dark mirror of the Emperor's own. The Emperor, though mighty, hesitated. Even in that moment, he saw the son he had once loved, the hero who had stood at his side during the Great Crusade. But Horus showed no such hesitation. He struck the Emperor with devastating force, his attacks fueled by hatred and ambition. The Emperor, grievously wounded, realized that there could be no redemption for his fallen son. With a final, desperate effort, he unleashed his full psychic power, obliterating Horus in a blinding flash of light. The War Master was no more, his soul utterly destroyed, even beyond the reach of chaos. The victory came at a terrible cost. The Emperor, mortally wounded, was carried back to the palace by his remaining warriors. There, he was interred upon the golden throne, a life support device that would sustain his body but leave him in a perpetual state of near death. The Imperium had been saved, but its ruler was no longer a man. He had become a figure of legend, a godlike presence whose will would guide humanity for millennia to come. The Siege of Terra marked the end of the Horus Heresy, but the scars it left behind would never heal. The galaxy was shattered, its unity broken. The traitor legions, though defeated, retreated into the Eye of Terror, their hatred for the Imperium undiminished. And the Loyalists, though victorious, were left to rebuild a realm that would forever bear the marks of betrayal. This was the Siege of Terra, the final act of the Heresy, a battle of unparalleled scale and significance. It was a tragedy, a victory, and a sacrifice, all in one. And it ensured that the Imperium of Man, though wounded and imperfect, would endure. For in the end, the Emperor's dream had not died. It had been tempered, reforged in the fires of war, and carried forward by those who still believed in his light. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Sacrifice. The galaxy smoldered. The stars themselves seemed to mourn, and the dream of unity lay in tatters. Terra, the heart of the Imperium, bore the scars of the greatest siege in human history. The streets of the throne world were choked with ash and blood, its skies blackened by fire and ruin. And yet, amidst this apocalyptic scene, a single thread of hope remained. For though Horus had brought the Imperium to the brink of annihilation, the Emperor still lived. And in him lay humanity's last, desperate chance for survival. The War Master's gambit, lowering the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and daring the Emperor to confront him, was a calculated risk. Horus knew that he had reached the zenith of his power. Empowered by the Chaos Gods, he had become more than a man, more than a Primarch. He was their chosen champion, a vessel for their boundless hatred of the Emperor and his Imperium. Yet even in his ascension, Horus was not invincible. He needed to strike a decisive blow to shatter the Emperor's will and claim victory before the Loyalist reinforcements could arrive. Within the Imperial Palace, the Emperor deliberated. He was no stranger to sacrifice. The Great Crusade itself had been built on the blood and toil of countless lives. But now, the price of failure was unthinkable. If he did not act, Terra would fall, and with it, humanity's last hope of resisting the forces of chaos. The Emperor gathered his closest warriors, Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, and a select few others, and prepared for the final confrontation. The plan was simple in its desperation. Teleport directly onto the vengeful spirit, cut through the traitor forces, and confront Horus himself. But, as with all things touched by chaos, nothing went as planned. The warp storm that engulfed Terra, a swirling vortex of malevolence summoned by the traitors, disrupted the teleportation sequence. The Loyalists were scattered across the massive warship, separated and forced to fight their way through its labyrinthine corridors. The vengeful spirit was not merely a battleship, it was a fortress, corrupted and reshaped by the will of chaos. Its halls pulsed with unnatural energy, its walls alive with the screams of the damned. Sanguinius, the angelic primarch of the Blood Angels, was the first to reach the War Master. His journey through the ship had been harrowing, and he bore the wounds of countless battles against demons and traitors alike. Yet he pressed on, his golden wings and radiant presence a beacon of hope. When he finally stood before Horus, the sight that greeted him was both heartbreaking and horrifying. The brother he had once loved, the leader he had followed into countless battles, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a being consumed by the power of the Chaos Gods. The duel between Sanguinius and Horus was a tragic inevitability. Sanguinius, though a paragon of purity and strength, was no match for the War Master, whose power now eclipsed that of any mortal or primarch. Yet the angel fought with everything he had, not for victory, but for the hope of delaying Horus long enough for the Emperor to arrive. The battle was fierce, a clash of light and darkness that shook the vengeful spirit to its core. But in the end, Sanguinius fell, his body broken and his lifeblood staining the corrupted floor. His sacrifice, however, was not in vain. It weakened Horus, if only slightly, and prepared the way for the Emperor. When the Emperor finally confronted Horus, it was a moment that transcended mere warfare. This was not just a battle between father and son, or even between opposing ideologies. It was a clash of cosmic significance, a confrontation between the embodiment of humanity's potential and the forces that sought to consume it. Horus, his armor blackened and his eyes alight with the fire of chaos, unleashed his full fury. He was not merely fighting to kill the Emperor, he was fighting to break him, to prove that the vision of unity and enlightenment was a lie. The Emperor, for his part, was hesitant. Even now, after all the betrayal and bloodshed, he could not bring himself to destroy Horus outright. The memory of the son he had once loved stayed his hand, and for a moment he tried to reason with the War Master. He offered Horus redemption, a chance to turn back from the abyss. But Horus, consumed by the dark gods and his own hatred, rejected the offer. With a roar of defiance, he struck the Emperor with all the power at his command. The duel that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Horus, fueled by chaos, wielded power that could tear apart reality itself. The Emperor, though weakened by the years of war and betrayal, still possessed the might of a god. Their blows shattered the walls of the vengeful spirit, their psychic energies clashing in a maelstrom that warped the ship around them. The Emperor fought not just with his strength, but with his mind, reaching out to Horus in a desperate attempt to find some remnant of the sun he had once known. But Horus was lost. The man who had been the Emperor's greatest champion, the hero of the Great Crusade, was gone, his soul devoured by the Chaos Gods. In that moment, the Emperor made a choice. With a final, devastating surge of power, he unleashed the full force of his psychic might. The energy consumed Horus utterly, annihilating his body and obliterating his soul. Even the Chaos Gods could not save him. They had gambled everything on Horus, and in his defeat, they withdrew. Their influence diminished, if only for a time. The Emperor's victory came at a terrible cost. Mortally wounded, his body broken and his mind scarred, he was found by Rogel Dorn and the surviving Loyalists. They carried him back to the Imperial Palace, where he was placed upon the Golden Throne, a life support device designed to sustain his shattered form. The Emperor's physical body was now a husk, but his psychic essence endured, casting its light across the Imperium and keeping the forces of chaos at bay. The aftermath of the Siege of Terra was both triumphant and tragic. The traitor legions, leaderless and shattered, retreated into the Eye of Terror, their rebellion broken, but their hatred undimmed. The Loyalists, though victorious, faced the monumental task of rebuilding an imperium that had been scarred beyond recognition. The Emperor's vision of a united humanity was no longer a dream. It was now a fragile reality, sustained by the faith and will of those who remained. For the Imperium, the Emperor's sacrifice became the cornerstone of its existence. He was no longer just a ruler. He was a god, enshrined in myth and worshipped as the savior of humanity. Yet this apotheosis came at a cost. The Emperor's silence left a void that was filled with bureaucracy, superstition, and the oppression of the ecclesiarchy. The Imperium of the future would be a shadow of the one he had envisioned, a realm of darkness and fear, sustained by the light of a man who could no longer speak to his people. This, then, was the Emperor's sacrifice, a victory won at unimaginable cost, a triumph that ensured humanity's survival, but forever altered its destiny. The Horus Heresy had ended, but its legacy would endure, a reminder of the fragility of hope and the enduring power of faith. And so, the galaxy turned, its stars bearing witness to a story of ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate price of salvation. And so, the Horus Heresy came to its bitter conclusion. The galaxy lay broken, its worlds scorched by fire, and its people haunted by the echoes of betrayal. The Emperor of mankind, once the guiding light of unity and reason, now sat immobile upon the Golden Throne, a god in truth, but only in the absence of his voice. His vision of a perfect imperium, an unbroken humanity freed from ignorance and superstition, was now a distant memory, eclipsed by the harsh reality of a galaxy in ruin. The death of Horus marked the end of the heresy, but it was not a victory to be celebrated. It was a Pyrrhic triumph, a moment of survival purchased with unimaginable sacrifice. The Emperor had given everything: his strength, his body, and his connection to his beloved sons, to ensure that humanity might endure. Yet what he left behind was not the shining beacon of hope he had envisioned, but a realm held together by fear, oppression, and the worship of a god he had never wanted to become. Across the Imperium, the myth of the Emperor grew. The truth of his sacrifice faded, buried beneath layers of dogma and propaganda. To the common citizen, he became a divine figure, a savior whose light kept the darkness at bay. To the warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, He was a father lost, a legacy they fought to uphold even as they questioned the cost. And to the survivors of the heresy, those who had seen the dream crumble before their eyes, he was a reminder of what could have been, a golden vision of a future now forever out of reach. The traitor legions, broken but not destroyed, retreated into the eye of terror, their hatred undiminished. They became the eternal enemies of the Imperium, their existence a grim testament to the consequences of ambition and the insidious power of chaos. From the shadows, they watched and waited, their every move a threat to the fragile stability the Emperor had died to protect. And so, the galaxy remained in perpetual war, its wounds never healing, its people caught in an endless struggle for survival. The loyalist Primarchs, those who had stood firm in the face of betrayal, were left to pick up the pieces. Rogel Dorn fortified the Imperium, building walls where once there had been bridges. Robout Guilliman, the master of strategy, worked tirelessly to restructure the shattered realms, his Codex Astartes becoming the blueprint for an Imperium that could endure. But even these mighty sons of the Emperor were not immune to the weight of loss. One by one, they disappeared, some falling in battle, others vanishing into the void, leaving humanity to carry on without them. And yet, for all the loss, for all the sorrow, the Imperium endured. It endured because it had to. The Emperor's sacrifice had ensured that the light of humanity would not be extinguished, even if it flickered in the winds of chaos. The Imperium became a fortress, its every system bent toward survival in a galaxy that sought its destruction. Billions of lives were sacrificed daily to maintain the Astronomicon, the great beacon of the warp powered by the Emperor's psychic light. Entire worlds became engines of war, their people living and dying to fuel an unending conflict. Faith, once rejected by the Emperor, became the cornerstone of the Imperium's survival, binding its people together in devotion to a silent God. But the scars of the heresy could never be erased. The betrayal of Horus and the traitor legions left a mark that would forever define the Imperium. It became a realm of suspicion, its rulers ever vigilant for signs of corruption. Its citizens lived in fear not just of Xenos and demons, but of their own neighbors, their own thoughts. The dream of enlightenment and unity had been replaced by a grim determination to survive at any cost. And so, the story of the Horus heresy was etched into the annals of history, a cautionary tale of ambition and betrayal, of brotherhood lost, and the terrible price of failure. It was a story told in whispers, a legend passed down through generations, its truths distorted, but its lessons clear. It was the story of humanity's greatest hero, who fell not because he was weak, but because he was human. It was the story of a father who gave everything for his children, only to see them turn against him. And it was the story of a galaxy that could never forget the cost of its survival. The Emperor's light still shines, casting its glow across the stars, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope endures. But the shadows it casts are long, and the wounds of the heresy run deep. The Imperium survives, but at what cost? Its people live, but do they truly thrive? These are the questions that linger in the void, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. This is the legacy of the Horus heresy, a galaxy forever scarred, a dream forever lost, and a lesson carved into the bones of history, that even the brightest light can falter, that even the greatest hero can fall, and that even the most perfect vision can crumble under the weight of ambition and betrayal. And yet, in the face of all this, humanity endures. For that is the Emperor's gift and his curse. the Imperium survives. The war goes on, and the stars still burn with the echoes of what once was and what might yet be.